The rain in Seattle came down in thin silver sheets, soft but relentless, washing the streets in a shimmer of neon light. Harbor Diner sat at the corner of 4th and Pine, its old chrome sign flickering red against the wet glass. Inside the place was nearly empty, except for the low hum of the coffee machine and the radio whispering an old jazz tune that nobody was listening to. Grace Miller wiped the counter for the 3rd time, her mind half on the bills waiting at home and half on the anatomy quiz she had to cram for before her next shift at nursing school. It was close to midnight when the door chimed one last time. A man walked in wearing a charcoal coat that seemed too elegant for the grease and warmth of the diner. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that made people instinctively move aside, even in a room this empty. He sat down at booth 9, the one near the window, and ordered a black coffee, no sugar. His name, according to the reservation tag the manager had placed earlier that evening, was David Hale. Grace had recognized it from the local business magazine she sometimes read in the break room. Hale Ventures, Tech Investments. One of the youngest self-made billionaires in Washington. Yet up close, he did not look like the photos. His posture was tense, his gaze distant, as if he were somewhere else entirely. The phone in his hand vibrated twice before he answered in a tone so low and measured it sent a small chill through her. His words were clipped and deliberate. Grace only caught fragments as she poured his coffee. Terms like acquisition and liability meant nothing to her, but the tone did. It was the sound of control of someone who rarely got told no. When the call ended, he stared at the dark surface of the coffee, but did not drink it. For a long moment, his reflection rippled in the cup, fragmented by the tiny waves of steam. Grace approached cautiously. "Long night?" she asked softly. He looked up, almost surprised she had spoken. Then for the first time a trace of humanity crossed his face. "You could say that. Coffee helps," she offered. "Maybe," he replied, voice flat. "But some nights nothing does." He smiled faintly, thanked her, and stood. The chair creaked as he pushed it back. He left a $50 bill under the saucer, far more than the coffee cost, and walked out into the rain without another word. Grace watched the automatic doors close behind him, leaving a gust of cold air in his wake. She turned back to wipe the table, humming to herself, when her rag brushed against something firm wedged in the corner of the seat. It was a wallet, not the worn-out kind she saw every day, but something expensive, smooth black leather, the kind that gleamed even under the dull diner lights. A small diagonal scratch marked one corner like an imperfection that somehow made it look more real. Grace hesitated before picking it up. It felt heavier than it should have. She opened it just enough to see the sleek titanium edge of a credit card and a crisp ID, David Hale. The same man who had just walked out into the rain. There were several $100 bills, folded with exact precision, so perfect they looked untouched by human hands. Behind them was a single business card with no company name, no logo, only a phone number, printed in silver ink. Her pulse quickened. $5,000 could cover her rent for 6 months. It could pay for her mother's new prescription, maybe even for that second semester she was afraid she would have to skip. She swallowed hard, staring at the door. The street was empty, except for the soft glow of the Tesla still idling across the road. The car had not moved. Its headlights cut through the rain like quiet eyes fixed on the diner. Grace froze. A thought whispered through her mind like static. What if he left it there on purpose? She turned the wallet in her hands, studying the way the light reflected off the leather. A faint smudge, her own fingerprint, now rested beside the scratch. She felt a strange mix of fear and curiosity. Maybe he wanted to see who would keep it. Maybe this was some rich man's social experiment, a test of honesty for his own amusement. Or maybe it was just an accident, a forgetful moment from a man too burdened by his world to notice a missing wallet. The rain grew louder against the windows. Grace stepped closer to the glass. The Tesla's engine still hummed softly. Through the haze of the storm, she thought she saw movement inside, just a silhouette, a man's shape motionless behind the wheel. Watching, her chest tightened. Should she run outside and return it? Should she wait, or should she pretend she never saw it at all? The hum of the diner clock filled the silence. Midnight struck. Grace's reflection met her own in the window, half shadow, half light. She exhaled slowly, her breath fogging the glass, and whispered to herself, "Do the right thing even when no one's watching." But someone was watching. She looked down at the wallet again, her thumb tracing the small imperfection on its edge. That tiny flaw made it seem almost human, almost fragile, like the man who had left it behind. She did not know that the decision she was about to make would change everything, that a simple act of honesty would pull her into the orbit of a man who did not believe in coincidence. Outside, the Tesla's headlights dimmed for a moment, then brightened again. Grace felt her pulse drum in her ears. She turned back toward the phone hanging by the register, heart pounding, mind racing, between right and wrong, between fear and curiosity. The wallet sat heavy in her hand, her fingerprint already sealed into its surface. She did not yet understand that it was not just leather and money she was holding. It was the beginning of a test of honesty, a test of fate. And before the night was over, that test would call her name. Morning came gray and wet as always in Seattle. The sound of rain against the roof, mixing with the low rumble of passing buses. Grace Miller woke to the shrill buzz of her alarm at 6:30, rolling over on the narrow mattress of her tiny apartment in Ballard. The room was barely big enough for a bed, a desk covered in textbooks, and a flickering lamp she had bought second-hand. Steam from the kettle drifted through the air while she tied her hair back, glancing at the yellow sticky note on the refrigerator door. Do the right thing even when no one's watching. Her mother's words. She whispered them under her breath every morning before leaving for work, as if they were a prayer strong enough to hold her life together. Her mother, once a nurse herself, now lay recovering from heart surgery in a small rehab clinic outside the city. Grace sent every spare dollar she earned to help cover the bills, though lately even that felt like pouring water into a bucket with holes. The night before replayed in her mind like a loop she couldn't escape. The rain, the wallet, the car that never left. She had locked the diner's cash drawer and hidden the wallet in the manager's safe until she could decide what to do. She hadn't slept much. Some part of her brain kept whispering that it might already be too late, that maybe whoever was in that Tesla knew exactly where she lived. But another voice, quieter and steadier, told her she had done the right thing. By 7:15, she was already at her second job, wearing blue scrubs beneath a faded hoodie, clocking in at the community clinic on 3rd Avenue. The building was old, the walls lined with faded posters about flu shots and mental health awareness. Grace liked it there. The patients smiled at her even when they were scared, and for a few hours each morning, she felt like her life meant something more than bills and exhaustion. When she handed an elderly man his prescription, he said, "You've got kind eyes, sweetheart. Don't lose that." She smiled and promised she wouldn't, though she wasn't sure kindness paid the rent. During her lunch break, she sat outside under the awning eating a banana and scrolling through job listings on her cracked phone. She paused when she saw an article headline flash across her feed: David Hale, CEO of Hale Ventures, expands philanthropic arm with new community health program. The photo showed him in a sleek navy suit, standing before a wall of glass overlooking the bay. The same man who had sat in her diner booth at midnight, looking like he carried the world in his shoulders. The sight made her stomach twist. Was it really a coincidence that he had left his wallet behind? She closed the browser quickly, stuffing the phone back into her pocket as rain misted across her face. When her shift ended, she took the bus home, standing because every seat was full. Seattle traffic crawled through puddles and reflections of red brake lights shimmered on the wet asphalt. Grace's reflection in the window looked older than her 24 years. There were small lines at the corners of her mouth from too much worry, too little sleep. The bus passed the university district, where students her age walked in groups with umbrellas and laughter, heading to classes she could no longer afford. A small ache formed in her chest, not jealousy exactly, but a quiet longing for a life that had space to breathe. When she got home, the apartment was dark, except for the blinking light on the old answering machine. She pressed play. "Hi, sweetheart, it's Mom. Just calling to say I'm proud of you. The nurses here say I'm recovering faster than they expected. Don't skip meals, okay? I love you." Grace smiled, her eyes stinging as she whispered back, "I love you too, Mom." She sat on the couch, opening her worn notebook, filled with class notes and grocery lists. Every page was crowded with numbers, arrows, reminders, evidence of how she tried to hold her world together with organization and prayer. She flipped to the back where she kept her someday list. 1, graduate nursing school. 2, buy Mom a small house with a garden. 3, save 1 life that matters. She traced the list with her finger and sighed. The wallet came back to mind again, heavy in her thoughts. She wondered if the man had noticed it missing by now. Maybe he had already written it off, too rich to care. But then she remembered the car that had not left. The way it had waited, like an eye refusing to blink. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had already been seen, measured, judged. Later that evening, she returned to the diner for her night shift. The same hum of fluorescent lights, the same smell of coffee and fried onions. The manager, Lenny, a broad-shouldered man with a cigarette voice, greeted her with his usual sarcasm. "Miller, you look like death warmed over. You been studying again?" She forced a smile. "Something like that. That rich guy from last night, the one in booth 9, left you a tip or what?" Lenny laughed at his own joke, wiping his hands on a towel. "By the way, I found a wallet in the safe this morning. Yours." Her heart skipped. "No," she said too quickly. "It belongs to a customer. I'm figuring out how to return it." "Well, make sure you don't get me in trouble," he grumbled, disappearing into the kitchen. Grace exhaled slowly, her hands trembling, as she poured the first cup of coffee for a trucker who came in every night. She looked out the window, half expecting to see the Tesla again. The street was empty, just reflections of streetlights shimmering in puddles. Still, she couldn't shake the sense that something had begun moving around her like invisible gears clicking into place. Somewhere out there, David Hale might already be deciding what to do next. And Grace, without knowing it, had already stepped into his orbit. She glanced at the sticky note she kept folded inside her apron pocket. Do the right thing. It wasn't just advice anymore. It felt like a map, one that would lead her straight toward the test waiting ahead. Hours before the rain and the wallet and the silent watching car, David Hale had been sitting in booth 9, staring out through the rain-streaked glass at the quiet city that no longer felt like home. Seattle glowed under 1,000 reflections, but he saw none of them. His mind was full of numbers, contracts, betrayals, dressed up as business deals. Hale Ventures had grown too fast, and the people closest to him had learned how to weaponize his trust. The call that evening had been the last confirmation he needed that even loyalty had a price tag. When the line went dead, he had sat in silence for several minutes, the untouched coffee cooling beside him, his reflection rippling in the dark liquid. That was when he noticed her, Grace Miller. A young woman with tired eyes and a smile that didn't quite hide the exhaustion beneath. She moved like someone used to carrying too much and complaining too little. She filled water glasses, balanced trays, and laughed politely with strangers who didn't see her as anything beyond service. But when she noticed his untouched coffee, she approached him with quiet confidence. "You don't like it?" she asked. "It's fine," he said. "Just not what I need." "What do you need then?" she asked, tone half teasing. He looked at her, surprised by the question. "An answer I can't buy." She smiled slightly, wiping the counter. "That's the hardest kind." David studied her face for a moment longer than he should have, the faint freckles on her cheekbones, the weary kindness in her eyes. He saw no calculation there, no agenda, just genuine presence. "Ever wonder," he asked softly, "how different your life could be if one night went differently?" Grace tilted her head. "I don't think about what could be," she said, voice calm but steady. "Only what's right now." The simplicity of it hit him harder than he expected. Most people in his world lived on what-ifs and probabilities. Here was a girl who believed in something far rarer, doing the right thing in the present tense. The words echoed in his mind long after she turned away. When she brought the check, he left a 50, an impulse he didn't question. He stood to leave, but before stepping out, his hand brushed the smooth leather of his wallet. It was a small, almost invisible pause. Then, without looking back, he left it on the seat. Outside, the rain had started to thicken into mist. His driver opened the door of the Tesla, but David waved him off. "Give me a moment," he said. Inside the car, the interior lights glowed faint blue. His assistant, Robert, sitting in the passenger seat, turned slightly. "You're doing it again," he said, tone halfway, between concern and disbelief. David rested his hand against the cold glass of the window, watching the diner through the blur of rain. "Doing what testing people?" Robert replied, "The last time you tried that, the guy never called. You said you were done with experiments." David's eyes narrowed. "I'm not testing for greed this time." "Then what?" "Honesty," he said quietly. "I need to know it still exists." Robert frowned. "You're the richest man in the room every time you walk into one, David. People lie to you because they're scared or because they want something. You can't expect honesty from a city that runs on ambition." David didn't answer. His gaze remained on the window, fixed on the booth where Grace was clearing tables, her movements methodical, unaware. "You see her?" he asked softly. "That's the kind of person I used to believe the world was full of. Before I started buying it, Robert sighed. And if she keeps it, if she takes the money and disappears, then I'll know what I need to know. David said, his voice barely more than a whisper. He leaned back against the seat, eyes still on her silhouette, framed by the neon lights. Something about her reminded him of another night. Long ago, of his mother's words before she passed. Wealth means nothing if you can't trust the hands that hold it. That memory had built his empire and haunted it at the same time. The rain intensified, drumming softly on the roof of the Tesla. David's reflection flickered across the glass, superimposed on Grace's outline. Through the diner window, a strange merging of two lives that had never met before. He felt a sudden pang of guilt. He wasn't sure if he was searching for goodness or simply trying to prove it was extinct. Robert broke the silence again. You do realize this could backfire. If someone recognizes your name on that ID, it'll be on social media in minutes. Billionaire leaves wallet with cash in diner. You'll look ridiculous. David gave a faint, humorless smile. Then let them laugh. If one person proves the world isn't entirely corrupt, it's worth it. Robert shook his head. You sound like your father. He died believing the wrong people, David replied, eyes still on Grace. I'd rather die believing the right one. They sat in silence after that. Inside the diner, Grace was locking up her movements slower now, fatigue weighing her down. The clock above the counter struck midnight. She turned off the open sign and began wiping down the last of the tables. Then he saw it. The moment her hand brushed the wallet, the brief flicker of hesitation before she lifted it. David leaned forward, his pulse steady but sharp. Through the glass, he could see her expression change: curiosity, realization, temptation. He could almost hear the war inside her. She found it, he murmured. Robert exhaled, and David watched her look out toward the car, eyes narrowing, cautious but not panicked. She knows she's being watched, he said quietly, but she's not afraid, just thinking. You're insane, Robert muttered. That's not a character test, it's psychological warfare. Maybe David said the faintest trace of emotion touching his voice. Or maybe it's the first honest moment I've seen in years. The diner lights reflected on his face as he watched her lift the phone, hesitating before dialing. For a brief second, he almost wished she wouldn't call, that she'd walk away and stay untouched by his world. But then she did what he both hoped for and dreaded most. She made the right choice. She's calling, he said softly, almost to himself. So honesty still exists. And if it costs her, Robert asked. David's gaze didn't waver. Then I'll owe her more than money. He leaned back, eyes closing, as the rain softened again. Feeling something in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Not victory, not control. Something like faith, fragile and unfamiliar. The car lights dimmed, the street lights flickered, and through the diner window he saw Grace lift the phone to her ear. Somewhere deep down he already knew he would never forget her name. The rain outside had slowed to a mist that clung to the windows like breath. Inside Harbor Diner, the silence after closing hours was thick and intimate, broken only by the occasional hum of the fridge and the slow tick of the wall clock above the counter. Grace stood alone in the soft glow of the neon sign outside her reflection, framed by red light. The wallet sat in her palm, heavier than it should have been, as though it carried more than money, something invisible and dangerous. She hesitated before opening it again, the leather warm from her hand. The smell was faintly of cedar and cologne masculine, but refined like the man himself. Inside, everything was too perfect. The bills were crisp-aligned edge to edge, like they had never been touched. She counted quickly 20 50s, then hundreds all in neat bundles. Her heart pounded. $5,000, more money than she had seen in one place in her entire life. Beneath the bills, she noticed a photograph tucked into a thin leather sleeve. A young David Hale stood beside an older woman whose smile was radiant despite the frailty in her frame. His mother, she guessed. The background showed a small garden sunlight filtering through apple trees. Someone had written on the back in neat handwriting, "For every fortune, remember where you began." Grace traced the words with her thumb. She closed the photo gently and replaced it, trying not to imagine what that kind of money could fix in her life. Rent, tuition, her mother's hospital debt. A car that actually started in the rain. Every practical dream whispered through her mind, each one making the temptation heavier. She exhaled slowly, her moral compass clashing with survival. She remembered her mother's voice, steady even in pain. "You sleep better on your own dime, Gracie. No peace comes from stolen comfort." The words hit her chest like a heartbeat. She bit her lip, closing the wallet firmly. It wasn't hers. It never would be. But how to return it? Her manager, Lenny, couldn't be trusted. He'd find a way to pocket the reward. Mailing it wasn't safe either. Something about this wallet felt too important, too deliberate. She flipped to the last compartment and found the single business card again. No company logo, no address, only a number printed in elegant silver on black. The minimalism itself felt powerful, like a key that unlocked doors she shouldn't even know existed. Grace stared at it for a long moment. The diner phone hung on the wall behind the counter, an old rotary model with a sticky receiver that always smelled faintly of grease. Her pulse drummed in her ears. She picked up the phone, each movement deliberate, her breath shaky but determined. The rain outside whispered like static. She dialed the number, one ring, two. It didn't even finish the third before someone answered. "Speak." The voice was male, low, calm, and absolute. No greeting, no name. The kind of voice that filled the silence with authority. Grace swallowed hard. "Hi, this is Grace Miller. I work at Harbor Diner downtown. I believe one of your associates, David Hale, left his wallet here earlier tonight." A pause followed. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that felt like surveillance. As if someone was evaluating her from the other side, dissecting her tone, her intention, her entire existence. Hold? The line went dead silent, but she could sense someone still there. Seconds stretched, then a different voice came on, lower, smoother, more refined, laced with control and exhaustion in equal measure. "This is David Hale." Grace froze. She hadn't expected him to answer himself. "Mr. Hale," she said quickly, "I found your wallet at the diner after you left. I just wanted to make sure it gets back to you safely." "You could have kept it," he said flatly. Not a question, a statement. "Most people would." "I'm not most people." She didn't mean to sound defensive, but the words came out sharp and honest. There was another pause, the faint sound of him exhaling through his nose. "You're working at Harbor Diner, Grace Miller. You have a night shift and an early class. Nursing student, correct?" Her blood ran cold. "How do you know that it's my job to know who I'm speaking to?" He replied calmly. "You should learn that some honesty draws attention. Not all of it safe." Grace's grip tightened on the receiver. "I just wanted to do the right thing, Mr. Hale. Nothing more." And yet he said, his voice softening. You called anyway, even after noticing the car outside." She didn't answer. The silence stretched between them like an invisible thread. Then his tone shifted firm again, commanding, "Do not leave. My driver will come to you. Do not hand the wallet to anyone else. Do you understand? You don't have to send anyone," she said, nerves rising. "I can drop it off at your office tomorrow, Grace." He interrupted, his voice cutting through like a blade. "Stay where you are." She froze. He had used her first name like it was both an order and a warning. "You remember my name," she whispered. "I remember people who do the right thing," he said quietly. "That's rare these days." Then his tone changed again, colder. "You did not open that wallet, correct?" Grace's breath caught. He was testing her. She hesitated just long enough for him to hear it. "No," she lied softly. "It's been closed since I found it." A silence followed so deep she could hear her own heartbeat echo through the line. When he finally spoke, his voice carried something she couldn't place. Approval, maybe even curiosity. "Understood? My driver will arrive in 15 minutes. Do not speak to him beyond confirmation." "Yes, sir." "Good. Your honesty or lack thereof will be evaluated." The line clicked dead. Grace stood there, the receiver still in her hand, her pulse racing. Evaluated. The word echoed in her head, cold and clinical. She placed the phone back on the hook and looked around the empty diner. Everything seemed suddenly sharper, the hum of the lights, the ticking clock, the flicker of the neon sign outside. She walked to the front door and locked it, then sat behind the counter, the wallet resting in her lap. The rain outside had turned to fog, wrapping the street in quiet mystery. She could see her reflection in the glass, pale and uncertain, clutching a secret she didn't ask for. She told herself she had done the right thing, but the right thing had never felt so wrong. 15 minutes, he'd said. She glanced at the clock. 2:15 a.m. Each tick of the second hand stretched eternity. Somewhere out there, a man she barely knew was already judging her from the shadows. And she couldn't shake the feeling that he already knew her lie. The hum of an approaching engine broke through the night. Headlights washed across the windows. Grace stood slowly, the wallet pressed against her chest, her heart pounding in rhythm with the clock. Whatever this was, accident or test, it had already begun. And something deep inside told her there was no way back to the simple life she had before tonight. The diner was silent, except for the hum of the fluorescent light above the counter and the faint hiss of the espresso machine cooling down. Grace stood by the door, watching the empty street as rain misted under the street lamp. The black Lincoln glided to a stop in front of Harbor Diner exactly 15 minutes after the call ended, its engine whisper quiet. Its windows tinted enough to turn its occupants into silhouettes. Her reflection in the glass looked pale, eyes-wide apron, still tied around her waist like a fragile armor. The driver stepped out tall, wearing a suit that looked too sharp for this part of town. His face was calm, unreadable, the kind of expression that spoke of years of discipline. "Miss Grace Miller?" he asked. His voice was formal, clipped polite without warmth. She nodded, clutching the wallet. "Yes, you're Mr. Hale's driver." He inclined his head slightly, gloved hands behind his back. "I am. May I?" She hesitated, then stepped forward, sliding the wallet across the counter, instead of handing it directly to him. He picked it up carefully, his movements deliberate, precise, as though he already knew exactly how heavy it should feel. He didn't open it. He simply studied her face for a few seconds. The way her eyes flickered with anxiety, but never greed. Then he reached into his coat and placed a sealed envelope on the counter. "Mr. Hale sends his gratitude," he said evenly. "This is not payment, it is acknowledgement." "I don't need anything," Grace said quickly, shaking her head. "I only wanted to return what wasn't mine." "Acknowledgement is not optional," he replied. "Good night, Miss Miller." Without another word, he turned and left. The door chimed softly as he disappeared into the rain. The car pulled away with barely a sound, its taillights glowing red before vanishing around the corner. Grace stood there for several seconds, frozen, the envelope untouched. The diner clock read 22:33 a.m. The world outside looked unchanged, yet she felt something had quietly shifted. When she finally tore open the envelope, the first thing she saw was a neat stack of bills, $5,000 crisp and sequential. Her stomach turned. Beneath the money lay a card made of dark leather, embossed with elegant silver letters that read, "Integrity is remembered." And beneath that, a note on ivory stationery, written in precise masculine handwriting. "Miss Miller, honesty still exists. Thank you. D.H." Grace's hands trembled slightly as she folded the note back inside. The gesture was kind, but it didn't feel like kindness. It felt like being seen. She locked the envelope in the diner's safe and kept only the small leather card, tracing its smooth surface with her thumb. The phrase echoed in her head as she turned off the lights. Integrity is remembered. But remembered by whom? Outside, the rain had softened into a fog that wrapped the streets in silver. Grace walked home beneath her umbrella, her steps slow-mind caught between fear and fascination. Somewhere in the city, David Hale was probably asleep in a penthouse, overlooking the Sound, completely unaware that the waitress who returned his wallet was now carrying a mix of awe and unease in equal measure. Yet something in her gut told her he was aware of everything. She didn't know that across town, in a high-rise office, where the city lights glowed below like scattered stars, David Hale was still awake. The wallet sat on his desk, the small scratch catching the reflection of his desk lamp. Beside it lay the file his assistant Robert had prepared, a background report on Grace Miller, minimal and respectful, exactly as he had requested. He didn't read it. He already knew enough. He remembered her voice steady but trembling when she said, "I'm not most people." That kind of conviction was rare. He leaned back in his chair, loosening his tie, staring at the wallet. A faint fingerprint smudge glowed faintly against the leather under the light. Her fingerprint. He hadn't wiped it off. For reasons he couldn't explain, he didn't want to. Robert entered quietly. "You got it back." David nodded. "She called." "And she told the truth, mostly." Robert raised a brow. "You think she opened it?" "She did," David said, almost smiling. "But she still did the right thing. That matters more than perfection." He tapped the wallet lightly, his expression unreadable. "She lied for the right reason." Robert exhaled slowly. "So what now? Are you satisfied?" "No," David said softly. "I'm curious." Back in Ballard, Grace arrived home drenched despite the umbrella. Her apartment was dark, except for the blinking light of the old answering machine. She ignored it, setting her keys on the counter and collapsing onto the couch. The events of the night replayed in her mind in fragments: the wallet, the phone call, his voice, calm but commanding, like he could see straight through her. "Your honesty or lack thereof will be evaluated." The words sent a chill through her even now. She took out the small card again, turning it over in her hand. It was beautiful, expensive, probably custom made. She placed it on her nightstand beside her mother's photo, then crawled into bed fully dressed. The city hummed outside her window. She closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. Somewhere between exhaustion and drifting dreams, she thought she heard a voice, his voice repeating the same question she had avoided all night. "What kind of person are you, Grace Miller?" The next morning she went to the diner early. The place smelled of coffee and bacon grease, the comfort scent of routine. Lenny greeted her with his usual half-smirk. "Late night," he teased. She forced a laugh. "Something like that." "That wallet thing sorted?" he asked. Her heart skipped. "Yeah, it's fine now." "Good. You're too honest for your own good, kid." He walked away, shaking his head. Grace smiled faintly, but said nothing. She unlocked the safe when he wasn't looking and checked inside. The envelope was still there, untouched. She counted the money again, half expecting it to have vanished like a dream. It hadn't, but now it looked different. It wasn't temptation anymore. It was proof that someone somewhere had noticed her integrity, or maybe tested it. She couldn't tell which. As the morning rush began, she poured coffee, took orders, and tried to bury the memory beneath the noise of normal life. But every time she glanced toward booth 9, her pulse quickened. That seat, that man, that night, they had rearranged something inside her. Across town, in the quiet hum of his office, David sat staring at the same booth, captured on the diner's security footage. A private copy he had requested as part of his lost item retrieval protocol. On the screen, Grace's reflection shimmered in the glass as she lifted the phone, unaware she was being recorded. David watched for a moment, then shut the laptop with a sigh. For reasons he couldn't name, the image lingered. "She's honest," he said quietly to himself, "but will she stay that way?" Down in the diner, Grace reached into her pocket and touched the card again, whispering to herself, "Integrity is remembered." The words felt less like reassurance now, and more like a promise, one she didn't yet realize she had made. The next night arrived cloaked in the familiar rhythm of rain and the hum of late-night traffic. But Harbor Diner felt different to Grace. Every sound seemed louder, every shadow sharper. She tried to lose herself in routine pour coffee, take orders, wipe tables, but her mind drifted back to the envelope locked in the safe and the memory of David Hale's voice, calm, deliberate, unnervingly intimate, through the static of the phone line. By 2 a.m, the last customers had gone. The neon sign buzzed weakly outside, casting the word "open" across the wet pavement, though she had already flipped the switch to closed. The air smelled faintly of sugar and steel. Grace stacked the last dishes, checked the till, and leaned against the counter, exhaustion pulling at her eyes. Then headlights swept across the windows, bright, slow-moving, deliberate. Her breath caught. The same black Lincoln. It stopped at the curb, idling with quiet authority. The reflection of its headlights danced across the glass like ghosts. Grace's heart began to pound. She half expected the driver from last night. But when the door opened this time, the man who stepped out was not a stranger. David Hale himself. He didn't wear the sharp charcoal coat tonight. Instead, he wore a simple dark sweater and tailored pants, understated but precise. The kind of clothing that said comfort without losing control. His hair was damp from the mist, his expression unreadable as he stepped inside the bell above the door, chiming softly. "Mr. Hale," she managed, straightening, wiping her hands on her apron, even though they were already clean. "I didn't expect I know." He interrupted gently, his tone not unkind. May I? He gestured toward booth 9, the same seat as before. Grace nodded, her pulse quickening. He slid into the booth, setting his wallet on the table, like a small monument between them. The scratch on its edge glinted faintly under the diner's light, and for a strange second she saw her own fingerprint ghosted over it again. He glanced down at it, noticing the same thing, then back up at her. You left your mark, he said quietly. I didn't mean to, she replied. Most people don't mean to leave marks, he said, but they still do. She didn't know what to say. The tension in the air wasn't hostile, but it was thick, heavy with unspoken questions. He broke the silence first. My driver told me you refused the money. It didn't feel right to take it. Why? Because honesty isn't something you sell back, she said, surprising herself with her own words. He studied her eyes, narrowing slightly, not with suspicion but intrigue. Most people would call that naive. Most people are tired of being disappointed, she replied softly. Doing the right thing is the only way to still feel like yourself in this city. His lips curved, just a hint of something that wasn't quite a smile. You believe that I have to, she said. Otherwise the world wins. David leaned back, his gaze still fixed on her, as though committing every word to memory. My foundation, Hale Foundation, runs several community initiatives, he began slowly. We fund health programs, mentorships, scholarships. We also test new partnerships, quietly, discreetly. You see, Miss Miller? I've learned that resumes lie, actions don't, so this was a test. She asked, her voice tightening. He didn't flinch. Yes. Her stomach dropped. You planted that wallet. I did. Why? He exhaled, his voice steady but low. Because I needed to know if someone like you still existed. Someone who does the right thing when no one's watching. Grace looked away, her throat tightening. You don't get to test people like that, she said quietly. We're not experiments. You're right, he said after a pause. And yet you passed something no one else has in months. Do you know how many people returned that wallet intact? None. Until you. I didn't do it for you, she said, her voice firm. I did it because it was right, which is exactly why it matters, he said, leaning forward slightly. You said you're studying nursing, correct? She nodded warily. You're trying to help people. I'm offering you a way to do that without drowning in debt. The foundation is expanding into medical outreach. We're offering internships, real ones, paid. If you accept your tuition, and living costs will be covered for the duration of your program. Grace stared at him, stunned. Why me? Because you remind me of what I stopped believing in, he said simply. Integrity, compassion. They used to mean something to me. Then I built an empire and forgot why. His honesty disarmed her more than the offer, and now she asked quietly, Now I want to rebuild something that feels human again. He slid a sleek business card across the table. It had only his name and email and the Hale Foundation logo embossed in silver. Think about it. If you accept this, could change your life. You're serious? I don't make casual promises, he said. Not anymore. She took the card hesitantly, her fingertips brushing his. The contact was brief, accidental, but electric. She looked down at the card, then back at him. And if I say no? His gaze softened, though his voice stayed even. Then you keep your honesty, and I keep my respect. Either way, the test is over. Grace didn't respond. Outside, the rain began again, tapping lightly against the windows. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the billionaire and the waitress, the test subject, and the man who had orchestrated it, bound by something neither of them could name. When he finally stood, she did too. He slipped his wallet back into his coat pocket, his fingers brushing the scratch once more. "You kept it safe," he said quietly. "That means something." She found herself saying, "So did you." He paused, looked at her, then smiled faintly. "Good night, Grace." Her name sounded different on his tongue, like he was tasting the truth of it. As he left, the bell above the door chimed again, soft but resonant. The Lincoln rolled away into the mist, leaving her staring after it, the card still warm in her hand. When she looked down, she noticed her reflection in the window, overlapping with the fading glow of the tail lights, as though two lives had just crossed paths for the first time. And though she didn't know it yet, that single meeting would not only alter her fate, it would test her heart in ways no test ever could. A week passed, but Grace couldn't shake the echo of that night, the sound of the diner bell, as David left the faint warmth of his card in her hand, and the way his voice had softened when he said her name. Every time she looked at that silver-embossed business card, she felt both gratitude and unease. It sat on her nightstand beside her mother's framed photo, catching the light like a small, steady reminder that she had stepped across an invisible line. On Friday morning, while she was getting ready for class, her phone buzzed with a new email. The sender was from Hale Foundation. Subject line: invitation for interview, community health internship. Grace blinked twice, unsure if it was real. The message was formal, thanking her for her previous act of integrity and inviting her to a meeting at the foundation's downtown headquarters. For a moment, she just stared at the screen, feeling her pulse quicken. She thought about deleting it, pretending she'd never seen it. But curiosity had always been stronger than fear. That afternoon, she took the bus downtown, her worn sneakers squeaking against the marble floors of the glass high-rise that bore his name. The lobby was all chrome and silence, the kind of place where even the air felt expensive. She signed in at the reception desk, her voice barely steady, then followed the assistant through mirrored elevators that seemed to climb forever. When the doors opened, she stepped into a sunlit office that overlooked the entire city. The skyline shimmered in the distance, reflections of rain streaks on glass towers painting the world below in shades of silver. David Hale stood by the window, hands in his pockets, watching the clouds roll over the bay. He turned when she entered, his expression calm but unreadable. "Miss Miller," he said. "You came." She nodded, clutching her tote bag. "You sent an email. I thought it was a mistake." "I don't make mistakes in who I invite," he replied evenly. He gestured toward a chair opposite his desk. "Please." She sat carefully, feeling wildly out of place in her thrifted blazer. The office smelled faintly of cedar and rain, the same scent she remembered from his wallet. David sat across from her, his tone businesslike yet personal. "You did something most people wouldn't. You returned what wasn't yours, knowing you'd gain nothing from it." "I wasn't looking for anything," she said quietly. "Exactly." He studied her face, his gaze steady. "That's why I wanted you here. The Hale Foundation's health program is expanding into community outreach clinics, wellness centers, scholarships for nurses. I need people I can trust, people who understand why integrity matters. And you think I'm one of them?" she asked, skeptical. "You proved it," he said simply, "when you had every reason not to." Grace felt her stomach twist. "You left that wallet there on purpose." "Yes, so it was all a test." It was, he admitted, but not just of honesty. He leaned back slightly, his eyes narrowing in thought. I test loyalty, instinct, judgment. You'd be surprised how much character reveals itself in a single moment. She looked down at her hands, uneasy. That's not fair. Neither is life, he replied softly. But you still managed to do what was right. There was no arrogance in his tone, just quiet conviction. I don't apologize for testing people, Miss Miller. It's how I separate those who take from those who give. Grace met his gaze again, her voice low but firm. And what if I hadn't called? What would have happened then? He smiled faintly. Then I'd still be sitting here, wondering if anyone like you existed. She didn't know whether to be flattered or furious. But beneath her nerves she felt something else, respect. He wasn't manipulating her now. He was revealing himself. So why offer me this? She asked. Why not just send a thank you card and move on? Because I don't move on from people who make me believe again, he said simply. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that doing good isn't a weakness. His sincerity disarmed her. She could see the fatigue behind his eyes, the kind that came not from sleepless nights, but from years of distrust. What would this internship involve? She asked cautiously. You'd work with our mobile clinics, he explained. We bring medical care to underserved communities. You'd help with intake patient coordination supplies, paid position, full tuition coverage, and mentorship under our health initiatives director. Grace blinked. That sounds like everything I've ever wanted. Then take it, he said quietly. Let me make it easier for you to do the right thing without losing yourself in the struggle. She hesitated. You make it sound like you're rescuing me. No, he said, his voice softening. I'm giving you a choice. There was a long silence. The city stretched beneath them, distant and rain-washed. Finally, she said, okay, I'll do it. For the first time since she met him, his smile reached his eyes. Good. I'll have the paperwork sent this afternoon. As she rose to leave, she paused. Why me, really? Because you didn't look at the money, he said. You looked at the name. That was yours, she replied. Exactly, he said. And you treated it with respect. She didn't know how to respond. As she turned to go, he added quietly, Grace. She stopped meeting his gaze. Yes, I meant what I said that night. Integrity is remembered. Don't ever let the world make you doubt that. She nodded, her chest tightening. I won't. He watched her leave her reflection, fading in the glass door, as she disappeared down the hallway. When the elevator doors closed, he turned back toward the window. The city stretched out beneath him, alive with motion and light. But for the first time in years, it didn't look empty. Grace stepped out of the building into the cool drizzle, the wind lifting her hair, as she looked up at the tower behind her. Somewhere high above David Hale was probably still standing there the man who had tested her and somehow given her hope at the same time. She smiled faintly, pulling the card from her bag. The embossed words Hale Foundation shimmered under the streetlight. Maybe life had just handed her a miracle disguised as a test. She whispered to herself, do the right thing even when no one's watching. And for the first time, she realized someone actually had been watching. And maybe, just maybe, he was rooting for her all along. The first months at the Hale Foundation unfolded like a dream Grace hadn't dared to imagine. Her days began with sunlight through the wide glass windows of the community health center, not the harsh flicker of the diner's neon lights. She wore scrubs with the Hale emblem, now her badge clipped neatly above her heart. Each morning she helped set up mobile clinics across Seattle's low-income neighborhoods, checking blood pressure, filling out intake forms, guiding patients who spoke more fear than English. She loved it, the rhythm of purpose, the quiet pride of being needed. Yet beneath that satisfaction, a constant undercurrent hummed David Hale's presence. He wasn't always there physically, but his shadow lingered in every hallway, every decision. She'd see his name on policy memos, his initials on donations, his voice in the speeches, broadcast through company-wide calls. And sometimes, unexpectedly, he would appear in person calm, collected his tone, clipped but kind. He would walk beside her during site visits, asking questions about patients, listening in that intense, focused way that made her forget to breathe. When he praised her work, it wasn't the empty flattery of a boss. It was the acknowledgement of someone who saw effort as a form of truth. One evening, after a particularly long clinic shift, she found herself alone in the building. The rain had returned, drumming softly against the windows. She packed up supplies when her phone buzzed. The name on the screen made her heart skip. David Hale. She hesitated before answering. Mr. Hale. His voice came through low-taut, almost raw. "Grace, I need you. It's my sister, she's collapsed." Her stomach dropped. "Where are you, home?" He said his words quick but controlled. "Ambulance is delayed, traffic's impossible. She's unconscious, pulse weak. Please." She didn't think, she just grabbed her kit and ran into the rain. The driver on duty stared as she flagged him down outside. "Emergency," she gasped. "Hale Residence, Medina." The man's eyes widened. The Hale estate. She nodded, breathless. 10 minutes later, they pulled through the towering gates into a world that felt miles away from everything she knew. The driveway curved through manicured lawns glistening under rainlight. The mansion loomed ahead, dark glass and stone, rising against the sky. Before the car even stopped, she was out sprinting through puddles. The door opened instantly, and there he was, David no suit. This time, just a plain white shirt, stained with worry. His face was pale, his composure cracked for the first time since she'd met him. "This way," he said, leading her through a hall of modern art and silence to a living room where a young woman lay on the sofa. She was in her 20s, fragile and beautiful, her skin ashen, her breath shallow. "Lily," David said, kneeling beside her. "She was fine an hour ago." Then she said she felt dizzy and collapsed. Grace dropped to her knees, fingers already finding the girl's pulse. "Weak," she murmured. "How long has she been unconscious?" 5 minutes, maybe 6. Grace turned to him. "Do you have any medical conditions?" Lily's eyelids fluttered weakly, her voice barely audible. "Heart, arrhythmia." Grace nodded sharply. "David, I need space towels and a bottle of water now." He obeyed without question, his movements efficient but frantic. Grace stabilized Lily's head, checked her pupils, and gently lifted her wrist. "Stay with me, Lily. You're okay." She spoke softly, the way her mother used to speak to frightened patients. David returned with what she asked for his hands, trembling as he passed the towels. She wrapped one under Lily's neck and spoke quickly. "We need to keep her warm. She's losing consciousness again." She slapped Lily's cheek lightly. "Hey, look at me. Breathe." For a terrifying moment, the girl didn't respond. David stood frozen beside them, his control dissolving. "She's not. She's alive," Grace said firmly. "But she's fading fast. Call 911 again. Tell them to prioritize this address." He did. His voice cracked on the words. Grace continued working her focus absolute. She retrieved her portable BP monitor, cuffed Lily's arm, adjusted her airway, and kept her talking. Within minutes, color began to return to the young woman's face. Grace exhaled deeply, relief washing through her. "She's stabilizing," she whispered. David sank onto the carpet beside his sister, running a hand over his face. When the paramedics arrived, Grace briefed them quickly, her tone calm and authoritative. They loaded Lily onto a stretcher, confirmed her vitals, and promised a smooth recovery. As the ambulance pulled away, Grace felt the adrenaline crash hit her like a wave. She stood in the foyer, soaked to the bone, shivering, her hands still trembling. David turned toward her, eyes dark with emotion. "You saved her," he said quietly. "No," Grace replied, her voice barely steady. "I just did my job. No one's ever saved her before," he said. "No one's ever saved me either." She looked up, startled. There was no arrogance in his tone, now only raw honesty. He stepped closer, his voice soft. "You didn't just act, you believed she could live. I saw it." Grace met his gaze, her throat tight. "You saw what anyone would have done." "No," he said, shaking his head. "Most people freeze. You didn't." The air between them felt heavy, charged with something unspoken. She wanted to look away, but his eyes held her there. "You should rest," she said finally. "It's been a long night." He didn't move. "Stay," he said quietly. "At least until I know she's safe." She hesitated. "David, please." He added the single word softer, stripped of authority. Something in his tone made her nod. "All right." He led her to the kitchen where the lights were dim and the silence deep. He poured her a cup of tea, his hands still unsteady. "You didn't have to come," he said, looking down at the table. "Most people would have waited for the ambulance." "You called me," she replied. "And I trust you," he said simply. "That's rare for me." She looked at him, trying to find the man from the diner, the distant, calculated billionaire who had orchestrated her test. But this was someone else. His control had cracked, and beneath it was vulnerability, humanity. "Why me?" she asked softly. "Because you remind me of the person I used to be," he said. Before everything became about risk and return. He looked down his fingers, tracing the rim of his cup. "When I saw you that night, I didn't see a waitress. I saw someone still unbroken by the world." Grace didn't know how to respond. The quiet between them stretched thick with everything neither of them was ready to say. Outside, the rain had softened to a whisper. The sound of it filled the space like a heartbeat. She looked at him again and saw not the billionaire, not the man of power, but the son who had once written for every fortune. "Remember where you began." "You should get some sleep," she said gently. "So should you," he murmured. "But somehow I don't think either of us will." She smiled faintly, exhausted but calm. He reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. The touch was brief but warm, grounding them both. "Thank you, Grace," he said, his voice a low murmur. "For everything." "You're welcome," she whispered. When she left an hour later, the rain had stopped completely. The first pale light of dawn stretched over the sound. Grace looked back once. Through the wide glass window, she saw David standing there watching her go. The look on his face was unreadable, but she felt its weight long after she'd disappeared into the waking city. Neither of them realized it yet, but that night had rewritten something between them. The test of honesty had ended. The test of the heart had just begun. The story of David Hale's wallet began as a whisper, a rumor that floated through the city like fog gathering weight as it spread. Someone at the diner had spoken, or perhaps someone at the foundation had leaked. Either way, by the time Grace arrived at work 2 weeks later, the internet had already devoured the story whole. Billionaire leaves wallet to test. Honesty, one headline read. Social experiment or exploitation, read another. There were photos of the diner grainy security stills, even a few of Grace from her foundation ID that someone had found and circulated. The comments beneath were relentless. He used her. He wanted to play God. Others defended him, calling it visionary moral genius. But most people weren't kind to Grace. She must have known. Probably got paid. Nobody's that innocent. Every Cinderella story has a price. By noon, the Hale Foundation's PR team was in crisis mode. Cameras crowded the front steps. Reporters shouted questions, and the employees whispered as Grace passed by. She felt the eyes on her everywhere she went. Her stomach was in knots, her chest tight with shame and confusion. She hadn't wanted any of this. That night, she returned to her apartment phone, buzzing with notifications, her inbox flooded with requests for interviews. She turned everything off, sat in silence, and stared at the small leather card, still resting on her nightstand. Integrity is remembered. The words now felt like an accusation. Her mother called worried. "Gracie, I saw the news. They're twisting everything. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she lied. "Just tired. You did nothing wrong," her mother said firmly. Doing right things sometimes makes people uncomfortable. Don't let them make you doubt yourself. Grace wanted to believe her, but she couldn't shake the sting of betrayal. David hadn't called, hadn't reached out, hadn't said a single word since that night she saved Lily. For days she'd told herself he was busy, that he was handling things quietly. But now she wondered if she had simply been part of the test all along. A pawn in a billionaire's experiment. At the foundation, the board members met behind closed doors. She overheard enough through whispers to know the scandal was hurting their funding. Some said she should be dismissed for drawing negative attention. Others argued she was the victim. No one asked her how she felt. By Thursday, she packed her things into a cardboard box, her badge and ID tucked inside. When she handed her resignation letter to the assistant, the woman looked at her with pity. "He'll regret this," she whispered. Grace didn't reply. She walked out of the building and into the gray Seattle afternoon. Rain fell again, light but steady, like the city's way of mourning. She felt free and hollow all at once. That evening, David Hale stood in his office, staring at the skyline. The media storm had reached a fever pitch. His communications director was begging him to issue a statement of denial. His lawyers wanted silence. But David couldn't ignore the truth anymore. He had tested the wrong thing. He had wanted proof that good people still existed, but in doing so, he had turned one into a target. His reflection in the window looked foreign, distorted by rain. Robert entered quietly, holding a tablet. "You've seen the headlines?" "I've seen enough," David said, voice rough. "You should address it." "I will." "With what a statement?" "No," David said, turning from the window. "With the truth." The next morning, the Hale Foundation sent out a press release announcing a live address to be broadcast that afternoon. By noon, the conference room was filled with reporters' cameras and the sound of murmurs bouncing off glass walls. Grace didn't plan to attend. She was home packing up her books when a message buzzed on her phone. "If you can come." She hesitated for several long minutes, staring at the message. Then, against every instinct telling her to stay away, she went. The room fell silent when David stepped up to the podium. He looked different, tired, stripped of polish, but determined. The flashes of cameras reflected off his suit like lightning. He began without notes. 2 months ago, he said, his voice carrying through the hall, "I left my wallet in a diner on purpose. I wanted to see if honesty still existed in a world where trust has become a currency we no longer trade. It was a mistake. The reporters shifted pens ready. Not because I was proven wrong, he continued, but because I treated goodness like an experiment. I turned a person's integrity into a spectacle. That was never my right. He paused, his eyes finding the back of the room. Grace stood near the exit, half hidden, her heart thundering. The woman in question, David said, is Grace Miller. She is not a subject of ridicule or curiosity. She is the proof that doing the right thing still matters. She reminded me that morality isn't data, it's human. She didn't just return my wallet, she restored my faith. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras turned toward Grace, who wished the floor would swallow her whole. David went on. You've all seen the headlines. You've all debated whether my actions were manipulation or morality. I'll tell you what they were wrong. Because the moment I made her honesty a story, I took away its quiet dignity. And for that, I owe her not an explanation, but an apology. The room was silent. Miss Miller, he said, his voice softening. If you're here, I want to say this plainly. You didn't fail my test. I failed yours. You did the right thing when no one was watching. And I forgot that true goodness doesn't need witnesses. Grace felt tears sting her eyes. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, before she could talk herself out of it, she stepped forward. The cameras flashed as the crowd parted to let her through. David met her halfway. His eyes filled with something she hadn't seen in them before: vulnerability. You didn't have to do this, she whispered. Yes, he said quietly. I did. They stood facing each other beneath the blinding lights, surrounded by silence. Why now, she asked softly. Because I realized the truth, he said. You were never part of my experiment. You were the exception to it. You humiliated me, she said, voice trembling. You let the world think I was complicit. And I'll spend every day fixing that, he replied. Not because of guilt, but because you deserve to be seen for who you are, not what I made you. She searched his face for deceit and found none. For once, the man who built an empire on control had let go of it completely. A reporter broke the silence. Mr. Hale, are you admitting fault? David looked at the crowd, then back at Grace. Yes, he said simply. And I'm also admitting something else. He turned slightly toward her, lowering his voice, though the microphones still caught every word. I thought I was looking for honesty, but I found love instead. The words hung in the air, fragile, disbelieving. The room erupted into whispers, flashes, stunned laughter. Grace's breath caught her hands trembling. He reached for her hand, his expression calm, despite the chaos around them. You don't have to forgive me, he said softly. Just know that I see you now, not as part of a test, but as the only truth that ever mattered. Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. She whispered, I don't know what to say. Then say nothing, he said. Just stay. The applause began slowly, uncertain, then built into a wave that filled the room. Cameras flashed, microphones caught fragments of emotion, but for that brief moment, there was only them, the billionaire who had tested the world, and the woman who had passed without trying. David pulled her gently into his arms. It wasn't for show, and it wasn't strategy. It was surrender. I'm sorry, he whispered into her hair. I'm sorry for everything. You already fixed it, she murmured. You told the truth. When they stepped back, the crowd was still clapping. Reporters called their names, but neither of them looked away from each other. The lights were blinding, yet somehow the room felt private. Grace realized then that redemption wasn't always quiet. Sometimes it needed to be seen to be believed. As the press conference ended, David turned to the reporters. "We'll be launching a new initiative," he announced, one led by Grace Miller to provide scholarships and community training for nurses and medical students who believe that integrity saves more than lives. It saves the soul of the profession. The applause rose again, louder this time. Grace looked at him through tears and whispered, "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," he said with a faint smile. "I did. For once, it's my turn to do the right thing when everyone's watching." 1 year later, Seattle woke under a golden morning that promised spring after a long, wet winter. The clouds had thinned, the streets glistened with dew, and the city carried a sense of quiet renewal. Inside a sunlit clinic bearing the sign Hale Foundation, Community Health Center Grace Miller stood by a window adjusting a poster that read, "Integrity Heals." She wore her nurse's badge proudly, now Director of Community Outreach, a title she still wasn't used to hearing. Her hands moved with calm assurance as she guided a young intern through patient check-ins. Laughter drifted from the waiting area where a group of children played with donated toys. The smell of coffee and antiseptic filled the air clean and grounding. This was her world now, a place where compassion and second chances existed side by side. Across town, David Hale sat in his office, overlooking the Sound, the same office where he'd once stared out at the world with detachment. But the man reflected in the glass was no longer that cold perfectionist. His sleeves were rolled up, his tie loosened. The walls, once filled with abstract art, were now lined with photos from community events, mobile clinics, and one photo of Grace, laughing with a child holding a stethoscope. He smiled faintly at it before closing his laptop and slipping something small into his pocket. A familiar black leather wallet, aged now with a faint scratch at its corner. The imperfection still caught the light like a scar that refused to fade. He ran his thumb over it and felt the faint ridge where her fingerprint had once smudged the surface. He could have replaced it, but he never did. Some things were better when they carried their story. That afternoon he left the office quietly. No security detail, no assistant trailing behind. He drove himself for once, the city opening up before him like a living memory. The roads led him back to where it all began, Harbor Diner. The neon sign still flickered, the same low hum in the air, the same smell of coffee and rain. Inside the booths were full, but booth 9 sat empty, as if waiting for him. Grace was already there, sitting by the window, her hair catching the late sun. She looked up as he entered, a smile softening her face. "You're late," she teased. "Traffic," he replied, sliding into the seat across from her. "Besides, you like making me wait." "Only because you used to make the world wait for you," she said, eyes gleaming. He laughed quietly, shaking his head. "I deserved that." "You did," she said gently, then nodded toward his pocket. "You still carry it?" He pulled the wallet out and placed it between them on the table. "Every day." "You could buy a new one," she said. "You're a billionaire." "Exactly," he said, "which means I finally understand what's worth keeping." She looked at it, the same black leather, the same faint scratch, and when the sunlight hit it just right, she could still see the faded outline of her old fingerprint. She reached out, touching the spot with her thumb, aligning it with where it had been a year ago. "Still there," she whispered. "Always," he said softly. For a moment the diner faded away, and it was just them, the waitress and the man who had once tested her heart. "You know," she said, "it's strange. That test of yours, it ruined me for a while. I know," he said, his voice low, "and it saved me." "Maybe that's why it worked," she murmured. "Because it broke both of us before it built anything real." He nodded slowly. "You taught me that integrity isn't about being flawless. It's about being real enough to leave fingerprints." She smiled at that, the kind of smile that carried forgiveness and love in equal measure. "You're still quoting me," she said. "I'm quoting us," he replied. The waitress came by with 2 coffees, the same order as before. "On the house," she said knowingly. Grace thanked her and stirred her cup, the clinking spoon, marking the rhythm of old memories. "Lily's doing better," David said after a while. "She's studying psychology now. Wants to work at the foundation when she graduates." "She'll be great," Grace said. "She's strong." "Like someone else I know." "Don't start," she said, laughing softly. "I already have enough pressure keeping your reputation honest." "Good luck," he said, smiling. "That's a full-time job," I noticed. Their laughter melted into a gentle quiet. Outside, the rain began again, not harsh, just the kind of drizzle that wrapped the world in silver. David watched it streak the window and said, "It's funny. The night I met you, I thought I was testing the world. But I was really testing myself, seeing if I still believed in people, in something good." And she asked, "You proved me wrong in all the right ways," he said. "And you proved me right," she replied softly, "that sometimes the people who seem untouchable are just waiting for someone to touch them gently." He smiled, and his eyes softened in that way that still made her heart skip. He reached across the table and took her hand. It was a simple gesture, no performance, no cameras, just skin against skin, and the quiet pulse of shared history. "Grace Miller," he said, his thumb brushing her knuckles, "you returned what wasn't yours, and somehow gave me everything I was missing." She looked at him, her eyes glassy but bright. "You don't need to thank me." "This isn't thanks," he said. He reached into his coat and placed a small velvet box on the table. Grace froze her breath, catching. "David." "It's not a grand proposal," he said softly. "Just a promise that no more tests will ever come between us." She opened the box. Inside was a simple gold ring, elegant, understated, just like the note she had once found in his wallet. Her eyes filled with tears. "You still believe in doing things the hard way," she whispered. "It's the only way worth doing," he said. "Say yes." She laughed through the tears. "You're impossible. I'm patient," he said. "It's what love taught me." She nodded, and he slipped the ring onto her finger. The fit was perfect. "You planned this," she said. "I hoped for it," he corrected. Outside, the rain turned to sunlight breaking through clouds. The diner windows glowed gold. People walked by, without knowing that history had just come full circle inside. Grace leaned closer, resting her forehead against his. "I guess integrity really is remembered," she whispered. "And so are fingerprints," he said. They kissed, then slow, unhurried, like the closing of a book that had finally found its ending. When they pulled apart, the wallet still sat between them, ordinary and sacred all at once. He picked it up and tucked it back into his pocket. "I never fixed the scratch," he said, standing. "It reminds me that even perfection needs a flaw to feel real." She smiled. "That's not a flaw," she said softly. "That's where you found me." As they stepped out of the diner hand in hand, the wind carried the scent of rain and coffee into the street. The city around them glimmered like something reborn. And as they walked toward the car, sunlight spilling over the wet pavement, Grace looked up at him and said, "You know what the best part of that night was? What you failed your own test." He laughed quietly. I did. Good, she said. Because that's when everything finally started. He opened the car door for her, smiling. Let's never stop proving each other right. And as they drove away, the reflection of the diner faded in the rearview mirror, but the mark she'd left on his wallet and his life remained forever. The imperfect proof that love, when tested, doesn't just survive. It remembers. Sometimes life doesn't test what we own. It tests who we are when no one's watching. Grace didn't just return a wallet. She returned something the world keeps losing a little more each day: faith. And maybe that's what love really is, not grand gestures or perfect timing, but the quiet courage to do what's right, even when it costs you something. David thought he was testing honesty, but in truth he was being tested by it. When she chose integrity over desperation, she showed him that character is built in silence, in the unseen moments that define us. And in that silence, love found its way, in slowly, honestly, beautifully. Look closely at your own life. How many times have you done the right thing when no one noticed? How many moments have passed where you could have taken the easy path but didn't? That's what makes you who you are. Not your wealth, not your status, but the fingerprints you leave on the lives you touch. Grace's fingerprint on his wallet wasn't just a mark. It was a reminder that our smallest choices can echo louder than words, reshaping destinies, healing hearts, even waking love in someone who thought he no longer believed in it. In a city of glass towers and flashing screens, she proved that humanity isn't lost. It's just waiting for one act of goodness to awaken it again. Maybe tonight, someone will find something you've lost. Or maybe you'll find something or someone you never meant to lose. And when that happens, remember, fate doesn't always knock. Sometimes it leaves a wallet behind. Sometimes it leaves a person who sees you not for your power or perfection, but for your heart. If this story touched you, pause for a second before you scroll away. Take a deep breath. Think of the one person who showed you kindness when they didn't have to. Send them a message or whisper a thank you to the universe for the way goodness always circles back. Because it does, always. Love, after all, is just the long echo of doing the right thing. Integrity leaves fingerprints. Love remembers them. I'm Emma, and this was A Poor Waitress Calls the Billionaire to return his lost wallet. Unaware it was a test. If you believe in second chances in love that grows from honesty, in the quiet power of kindness, leave it in the comments and tell me, where in the world are you watching from tonight? I'd love to know. And if this story made you feel something, even for a moment, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another night like this one. Because every story here is a reminder that no matter how cold the city gets, there's always someone out there still doing the right thing, still choosing love. This is Emma's Stories, where love isn't perfect, but it's real.